everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing very, very well. I apologize, I'm in my pajamas and I'm in bed, but I'm like, let's get comfy, let's get cozy, let's yap about Pretty Little Liars, you know what I mean? Let's just chill. I'm also in my depressed era, so that doesn't help the situation. So for today's video, I thought we would kind of do an explaining cece Drake kind of thing, a little cece Drake kind of deep dive. I was going to do Bethany Young today. I might do that for another video if you guys want to see that. But I thought cece to me is a very interesting character. Although I sympathize so much with her trauma and everything she's been through, it's also the judgment of, does that kind of override everything she did as A? And it's tricky because her A was a lot more violent, a lot more aggressive, and you know, the whole dollhouse situation was quite extreme, was quite a lot. And then you learn cece's story, and I think it's an important story. I think we could have had another story in terms of protecting that minority a bit. Pretty Little Liars were very bad at giving diverse characters just any sort of character that is not dead or evil. So I do think that storyline is up for debate in terms of whether that was the right thing to do or not, because her story is very hard-hitting. It's definitely an important story to tell and to show, but I just don't know if it was done in the right way of making her kind of the villain because of it, you know what I mean? But regardless of that, yeah, I feel a lot of sympathy for cece because of the amount and the extremity of, is that a word? Extremity of what she went through, especially at like such a young age too. But then I do like the debate of whether you can kind of take that and not kind of like, you know, forget what she did as A, but kind of be like, okay, you know what I mean? Because I feel like with Mona, for example, the majority of the audience are kind of like, you know, Alison was really, really mean to her. The girls were really, really mean to her. She went through a lot, blah, blah, blah. So you kind of have that soft spot for Mona. But with cece, I think because the A was so extreme, it's kind of like, okay, let's have that conversation, you know what I mean? But we're just gonna get into it. Hopefully me giving you the timeline of cece helps to kind of explain her presence on the show a bit more. I actually really like cece's character. There was just something about her that I really vibed with, obviously apart from her being A, but when she was introduced, I thought she was quite a fun, like, mysterious character to have on the show. So I really, really liked cece's character before we found out she was A. But then it also, because cece looked like Alison, it was such a nice kind of mystery of like, oh my god, these two girls are like kind of like identical and like in their humor and everything. So yeah, I quite like cece's character. Do I like her ending? No. Obviously I'm going to spoil it here, obviously. I don't really like her being A, just because I don't think a lot of it makes sense timeline-wise, but also, like I said, the story, I don't think it was the right thing to do here, personally. But also, because of the other options of A that I would have liked, I think those options are a lot more what I want. I would have loved Ren to be Charles, or I would have loved Arya to be A. Those were my kind of... I think Ren being Charles is the most obvious thing. I don't know, I feel like there was so much going towards Ren being Charles. I don't really know why it didn't happen, but I feel like there was a lot there to kind of signify that. But I would have loved if Ren was A. I feel like that would have just connected so many things of the show, and I just think that would have been good. But regardless, let's get into the cece thing. So, cece was born May 21st, 1988 to Mary Drake at Radley Sanitarium. Obviously, because Mary Drake was in Radley, she would be classed as not kind of being able to look after this child. So the child actually went to Jessica and Kenneth De Laurentiis. So cece was then kind of raised as their child, and for a lot of the like the child stuff, we know them to be one of the children. cece turns out later on to not obviously be one of the De Laurentiis children exactly. I think also her father, which we will get onto, the person who is her dad, I think is really, really odd as well. I don't really know why that was a thing. But regardless of that, cece was born and, yeah, placed into the care of Jessica and Kenneth De Laurentiis. We do not vibe with Kenneth De Laurentiis at all. Regardless of this, Kenneth said that cece's behavior started to really worry him. However, a lot of people think this was just kind of a get out card. I don't think Kenneth ever wanted to look after cece or have that responsibility of someone who was not his child. So I think Kenneth, regardless of what cece would have done, would have kind of, you know, she did this, she picked up on this, blah, blah, blah. Like, he would have done a lot of things to kind of get cece in trouble or kind of get her in the wrong so that they would eventually have to pass her on to another family. I don't think he was ever keen on looking after cece in the first place, which is so sad, actually, because, like, cece did not choose to be in the situation that she was in. She did not, you know, Mary Drake gave birth to her in Radley. That was not on, oh my god, I have a hair on my face and it's really annoying me. That was not on cece. Like, cece cannot control that situation. So yeah, we don't like Kenneth. We don't vibe with Kenneth at all, actually. I think also a lot of these behavioral things were because cece was exploring herself a lot. Obviously, at this stage, cece was Charles, so there was a lot of exploration of femininity and wanting to wear more feminine clothes and that kind of thing. So I feel like a lot of the kind of outbreaks that Kenneth kind of mentions would have been her kind of growing up and not really feeling like she's in the kind of correct body and trying to explore other things that she knew that kind of her parents would not really vibe with, although Jessica really got on board with it, but Kenneth was like not. So I feel like a lot of that wasn't necessarily due to cece being, you know, psychotic or anything at this age. I think it was a lot of because she had no feeling of herself properly in her body, and I think she was just exploring a lot of that herself. So I think a lot of that was kind of down to that kind of stuff, because it got to the point where she asked Jessica to buy her more feminine clothes. So we learn kind of like when Jessica would buy Alison a dress, for example, she would then buy cece the same kind of dress, which there's a scene later on which, like, this makes no sense too, because there's a scene where Jessica was really mad at Alison because Radley were like, oh, cece's escaped, but like it was actually like Alison or something like that. Maybe it was the other way around. Regardless, you know what I'm talking about. Jessica was really, really angry, but it's kind of like Jessica was like, you two were wearing the same thing, and I'm like, but you brought them the same thing. You know what I mean? Anyway, so yeah, it got to the point where cece asked her for more feminine clothes. Jessica was more than happy to kind of do that for her, but Kenneth was immediately not on board with that at all. So we don't like him. We don't like Kenneth around here. So then we have kind of the main thing which made them put cece in Radley when she was Charles. There was an incident where Alison was a baby and Alison was crying, and Cece tried to get the attention of her parents, but they were busy. Jessica was in the garden. Don't know what the Kenneth was doing. Maybe he was at work. I'm not too sure. Regardless, Cece wanted to stop Allison from crying, to look after her. So Cece thought it would be a good idea to give Allison a bath. However, the bath was scalding hot water. So when Cece put Allison in, obviously that was not a good scene. Kenneth walked in on it, and Kenneth came to the conclusion that Cece did that on purpose, which is ridiculous because this is a child. They would have not done this on purpose. You know what I mean? So this really, I think, for Kenneth was the opportunity to be like, we're sending Cece to Radley right now because I'm not dealing with this. Like I said, I don't think Kenneth ever really was on board with Cece being with them. And this was kind of his opportunity to be like, right, this is it. This is absolutely it. You know what I mean? Jessica visited Cece quite regularly though, made her feel very kind of appreciative, still kept her with the femininity stuff. Jessica was a real solid figure for Cece, and you know, Jessica De Laurentiis is not a good character, we know, of course. However, I feel like for Cece, she was really good to Cece, and which makes no sense that when Cece was she buried Jessica alive. I still don't really understand that situation. However, yeah, Jessica was very, very good to Cece, like this whole time, very supportive of everything that was kind of going on. And yeah, however, as Allison and kind of Jason grew older, the visits kind of stopped because Jessica, now that they were older, didn't really want them clocking that there was like another sibling that was kind of alive. And that's why Jason, the parents told Jason that Charles was an imaginary friend that he had growing up, so that he would think it was all in his head. And I feel really sorry for Jason, actually. I think he goes through a lot on the show. I think Jason's trauma is quite overlooked. Jason's obviously not a perfect character. There's things that I don't agree with, obviously, but I feel like Jason goes through a lot, and I don't know. I feel like that gets underlooked quite a lot too, but that's what they kind of said about Charles, to the children. So then, one night, this is the Bethany Marion situation. Charles made a friend in Radley called Bethany. Bethany Young, who we know got buried inside Allison's grave, instead of Allison. And they were on the roof and they were kind of playing and messing around. Cece was dressed in femininity clothes and they were just chatting. And then Marion Cavanaugh, who is Toby's mum, comes onto the roof, and Cece panics because Cece's like, oh my god, she's gonna see me dressed like this. And then Bethany's like, don't worry, I'll deal with it, whatever. And then she pushes Marion off the roof of the Radley sanatorium place. And then Bethany turns quite sinister at this stage, and she's like, I'm gonna tell them that you did this. So we kind of get this sense of that dynamic, and kind of Cece really didn't like her growing up, so we kind of get used to that kind of thing there, you know what I mean? So because Bethany told people about this being Charles, Jessica paid off Wilden to make sure that Mrs. Cavanaugh's death was assumed. This doesn't make any sense because Wilden would have been a child when this happened. So this is where the timeline kind of breaks apart a little bit, because Wilden and Cece, I think, were kind of around the same age. So Wilden would have been a child, and you know, the police in Rosewood are extreme, but them importing children, I'm not too sure would have been a thing, and Wilden would not have been higher up either. So I don't really, yeah, Just reading from my notes. Give me a second. My memory's terrible. We're going through mental illness, guys. The memory, there is no memory. As a direct result of Kavanaugh's murder, Cece was misdiagnosed, with intermittent explosive disorder. For the next several years, Cece was medicated with tranquilizers until one day she described that she almost drowned in her own drool. She's going through a lot. These people, I feel like, were very negligent towards Cece. Cece had a lot of misunderstanding towards her, misdiagnosis towards her. There were a lot of lies surrounding Cece. So this is where I have sympathy for her, because I feel like Cece did not get herself into this situation, and it was a lot of other people doing this for her and being very unkind towards her as well. So yeah, this is where I feel really, really bad sympathy for her, because I'm like, she's gone through all this trauma, which clearly, translates into her adulthood, and none of it was her fault. Absolutely none of it was her fault. So yeah, this is where the sympathetic part of me comes into play, and I'm like, yeah, she was A and she did all this, but no, I'm not covering up what she did as A, but I think it's very clear where things for Cece went wrong in terms of whatever was going on with the brain, chemicals and things like that. I think it's very clear where things went wrong in that regard. Cece then went to a camp for troubled boys, and at this camp is where she actually met her biological father. They don't know that they're father and daughter, but this is kind of where they met. But Cece's dad is Ted, and I found that very odd. I'm not gonna lie to you. When that got revealed, I'm like, that's come from nowhere. I don't know what that was about. I'm going to be honest with you. Ted feels very odd, feels very out of the blue, feels very like, okay, right. My issue is, I'm like, you're tying in these characters who have ties in the show, but are you tying them in just for the sake of it, just for like a little shock? Oh my god, it's this person you wouldn't expect. I feel like Ted had nothing to do with like that part of the story, and Ted being Cece's dad just felt weird. Regardless, who am I to say? So Radley then let Cece out for a funeral, but the funeral was for Charles, to finally say goodbye to that. And Cece thought now she could, come back to the De Laurentiis family and be introduced as like, who she is now. But Jessica actually re-enrolled her back at Radley. So once again, Cece has this whole excitement about finally kind of knowing who she is, knowing her identity, Jessica kind of accepting that, and she thought she'd be part of the family again. So there's that kind of disappointment there, and why, like I said, I feel like she held so much resentment for Kenneth and the family, because it's kind of like, well, why can I be part of the family like you guys are? You know what I mean? And like I said, none of this is Cece's fault. So I can imagine for her, it's kind of like, right, what actually did I do though? Like, for you guys to hate me like this, what actually did I do? Oh my god, there's a bird outside that's making so much noise. But Jessica told Kenneth that Charles had died, and then told Kenneth that she had like handled everything whilst he was like away. So everyone kind of thought that Charles had now died, not knowing that Cece was actually still very much there, very much alive, but still in Radley at this point. Cece really wanted to get out of Radley because after Bethany had lied about the Marion situation, she just felt like she couldn't really trust anyone. She actually kind of was really good academically. She really liked math, and that was kind of her like escape. And it says here, the board of directors at Radley granted her permission to attend classes at the University of Pennsylvania, which kind of makes sense now regarding the roommate situation, where everyone's like, how does she have a roommate if she's not, at I mean, if she's in Radley. So that kind of makes sense, but also still does not make sense because she was still in Radley. She would just go to classes. So maybe it doesn't make sense. I don't know. But anyways, Cece thought that going to school would be really, really fun, but out of boredom, one time she actually phoned in a threat to the school, which made them all redirect the classes to Rosewood High, which is where she did the prom, the yearbook photo, sorry, and where she met Jason. And from here, Jason and Cece do get into a relationship with each other, so a little bit of incest going on there. However, Cece does admit that there was nothing sexual going on between them because they were brother and sister. It never got to that stage, but I still think it's very weird that they were together. But Jason actually brings Cece to a family holiday that they go on, Camp May, which a lot happens at Camp May, which we will get onto. But obviously Jessica's mega fuming. She's like, oh my god, what are you doing here? But Kenneth and Allison and Jason don't know who Cece is exactly. So that kind of is her. She gets to spend time with her family, but under, no one knows that was Charles. And yeah, but a lot happens in Camp May because originally her plan obviously was to spend a lot of time with her family. However, just so much happens with Allison that kind of gets in the way there. So she doesn't spend her time as she kind of wanted to. Cece and Jessica kind of have a little bit of a disagreement too, because Jessica admits to Cece that she told the family, sorry, that Charles had died. And Jessica was like, Cece was like, oh, so you're using this as a cover-up. Like, you're covering me up. You're covering the person who I am up completely. But Jessica's like, no, that's not what it is. Like, it just was a new start, things like this. So Jessica swore she did it out of love. But I don't think she did. I don't know. I feel very 50-50 on it. I think there is some part of me that's like, I do think Jessica was doing it out of love, to protect Cece more than anyone. But there also is the thing of Jessica where I think Jessica was covering up a lot of secrets, especially like with Mary Drake and things like that. So I don't know how I feel on that. I think it's both. I think two things could be true on that situation specifically, but I obviously understand how Cece would feel about all of that. So Cece during Camp May was planning on telling Allison who she really, really was, but then this is when like Allison got with Wilden and there was the whole pregnancy scare. So a lot happened, so Cece couldn't really do what she planned to do. However, when they got back, Cece planned to tell her then as well, but this is when Bethany found out that her dad and her dad and Jessica De Laurentiis were having an affair, and Bethany went feral after this. She threatened Jessica a lot. She threatened the family quite a lot. So Bethany stole Cece's clothes and pretended to be her to leave Radley, as Cece had the privileges to leave with school and things like that. Cece went to the De Laurentiis house to stop Bethany from hurting her mum. And this is when we have the scene where Cece accidentally hits Allison. She sees Allison in her like yellow top, the famous yellow top, hits her thinking it's Bethany. However, obviously we come to find out that it was Allison. So then they're both like, oh my god, you've killed Allison. But we know that Allison fully wasn't dead at that point. However, Jessica obviously then buried Allison alive. She didn't know she was alive, I don't think, which I feel like you would be able to, because I think Allison was kind of moving here and there. But obviously you would also see someone breathing, I feel. But anyways, she wanted to obviously protect Cece, and also I feel like that would get a lot of Jessica's secrets out as well. So I think she was doing it to protect herself and Cece. But obviously we find out that Alison gets out of the grave with Miss Grunwald and totally leaves Rosewood. And Bethany, who I think Melissa buried Bethany, and Mona was the one that actually hit her. Um, she then obviously got buried into Alison's kind of grave instead of that. Jessica paid off Wilden again. He would have actually been the correct age this time around. But this time Wilden took Cece back to Radley, and their cover story was that she was found nowhere near Rosewood and just on the side of the road out of town. So Cece hoped that Jessica would forgive her for this, but ultimately that never really came. That never really came. Jessica always kind of resented her for this afterwards. So then Cece was kind of left by herself from that point. And this is when Cece kind of slowly takes the A game. After Mona is admitted to Radley, which is like kind of a year after this, Cece meets her. And obviously we know from this conversation, I'm going to sneeze. Never mind. I don't think it's coming. So we know from this that Cece took the game from Mona. She was really intrigued by A, and Cece really wanted to see if Alison was alive, and Cece's motive was that the girls were much more happier now that Alison had gone. And she overhears them say this, and that's kind of her motive for getting back at the girls. So she, like I said, she adopts this A character after she hears it from Mona, because there's obviously that bit there where Cece's in control when she's A. She's never really been in control in her whole life, so I feel like the A character for her was someone where she could finally be in control in situations and be that kind of decider of how things play out. Obviously, I'm not saying that's like, I'm not covering it up, but I understand why Cece was so attracted to that. So then the doctors slowly took Mona off her medication, and Cece stopped visiting her to retain her anonymous aspect. She knew she could never trust Mona, as Mona ran over her best friend Hannah with a car. Just before Charlotte stopped seeing Mona, she told her that if she helped her get out of Radley, she would play the A game with her. When she escaped, she purposefully met Aria, Spencer, Emily at the brew, and she told them she was friends with Ali and her name was Cece Drake. And I really like this introduction of Cece. Like I said, it's very much like, oh my god, you look like Alison, you sound like Alison, who is this character? So like I said at the start, I really liked this mystery aspect for Cece, because for us it was kind of like, right, who is this? And that unlocked a lot more secrets in regards to Alison, and there was a lot we learned about Alison through Cece. So I really liked this introduction. I actually thought, I don't know, I really, really enjoyed it. So Cece then started seeing a blonde girl in a red coat following the liars. She thought it would be Alison, but obviously she saw her mum bury Alison alive. So she was like, who is this? Cece's whole thing was she wanted to find out if Alison was alive or not. She finds out Alison is alive the night of the Thornhill fire thing. So she's so happy to hear that Alison is actually alive, because it saves her from thinking she killed her to actually she's alive, and that's like the main thing here. So I feel like the rest of the story we know very, very well. Obviously Cece was A. She was also Redcoat. The liars caught her as Redcoat. She obviously had the dollhouse. She had Sarah Harvey helping her. So I feel like the rest of the story is very much, we know it very, very well. Yeah, I can completely understand actually why Cece was A. I'm not going to gloss over the fact of everything she did, because she was very extreme with the liars and so much went down. Especially the dollhouse. The dollhouse was just so insane. I loved those episodes, but like it was insane. So I'm not gonna move on from like that or like gloss over that. But I feel like Cece is a character that, because the main focus of the Cece stuff is that it doesn't make sense, I feel like it actually gets glossed over of how much she actually went through and how much she didn't really do anything up until the Allison stuff. Really was put into these situations by other people. It wasn't really on her, a lot of the stuff. Obviously, when she got older and she did what she did, obviously that's very much on her. She has to take responsibility for that. But the stuff as Charles when she was little, like, she didn't have any part in any of that. And it was so much ignorance towards Cece, which is why I think it got to this state that it got to. So I think Cece's motive is very much there. I feel like Cece's motive, though, is much more anger towards other people rather than the girls. I think the girls were just easy targets because obviously she adopted that from Mona and she learned a lot through Mona. So I think it was easier to go after the girls, especially after she'd found out they didn't really like Allison. So I think the hatred is more to other people. Like Kenneth, for example, was like so like ridiculously horrible towards Cece, and it's like Cece was only put in this position because Mary Drake, gave birth to her in a not great state, and she was in Radley, and Mary Drake was only in Radley actually because Jessica had lied to the police about Mary Drake. So even Mary Drake really got herself into that situation without her actually doing anything. That's that regarding Cece. Like I said, I'm not too keen on Cece being A. I don't think she should have been A. I totally get where, we've explained where it's come from, where it's adapted from, blah, blah, blah. Like I said, I would have had Ran as Charles. I think that would have made so much sense. But I think the transgender stuff is a really interesting thing to talk about because Pretty Little Liars have such a, running thing of hurting diverse characters. They're either dead or evil, and it's such a running thing. So I feel like it's a really important story to tell for sure. Maybe just not as I'm not too sure, like maybe just not as the villain. Because I think it hurt a lot of things during that time and topics during that time. Because it was a very new thing. A transgender storyline was not a common thing to have on a show like Pretty Little Liars, especially during the time that Pretty Little Liars kind of came out. So it was a very important thing to tell, but in the aspect they told it, I think actually maybe hurt that topic a little bit. But that's up for debate and that's up to talk about. The other thing that's up for debate too is kind of the sympathy, how much sympathy to feel for Cece, because the Charles stuff I feel so much sympathy for. I think a lot of people neglected Cece as a child, but also growing up, and she never had that family aspect, and she would be refused to see her family or spend time with her family. So I feel really big sympathy for that, and obviously the Bethany stuff too. Being set up for that was really, really harsh, really kind of kept her in Radley. I feel like Cece would have been let out and like kind of would have actually lived a good life. Like I said, she was very smart. So I feel like she would have done something with her life, but the whole Marion stuff pushed her back quite a lot. And it was, again, we can't let this person out at all because they're very, very dangerous. So I feel so much sympathy for that. But then it's kind of like, where do you draw the line in terms of, she was she did a lot of bad things to the girls and very violent and aggressive things towards the girls. She was much more extreme than Mona. And she obviously has killed people too. So yeah, it's kind of like, I'm not gonna gloss over that because that was very intense for her being and doing all of that. But it's more where to draw the line, you know what I mean? Because like, we feel sympathy for Mona, and I feel like Mona is quite easily forgiven for what she did, but obviously her was very much less intense. Yeah, I'd love to know your opinions regarding those type of things. Because I think we get the sense of cece's full evilness when she buries Jessica. She obviously loves Jessica a lot, but Mary killed Jessica. Cece doesn't know at this point who kills Jessica, and she buries her and sends the video to the girls, kind of like a haha, I got you, I'm dangerous moment. So for me, it doesn't really make any sense, her burying Jessica like that. So I'd love to hear your opinion on that too, because I don't know. Maybe just wanted to take responsibility for it before it kind of came out that it maybe wasn't or something like that. I'm not too sure the writers thought that far into the future with like Mary Drake and things like that. So maybe it was a case of that. But so I'd love to know your opinion on the whole cece situation down below and everything I just spoke about. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.